Hi, this is Randal Schwartz, host of Floss Weekly. This week, Aaron Newcomb joins me. We're going to be talking about PyPI security and the changes they've recently made. You're not going to want to miss this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Floss Weekly with Randal Schwartz and Aaron Newcomb. Episode 545, recorded September 4th, 2019. PyPI Security. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by CacheFly. Give your users the seamless online experience they want. Power your site or app with CacheFly CDN, Content Delivery Network, and be 30% faster than the competition. Learn more at twit.cachefly.com. And by IT Pro TV. IT Pro TV provides IT training that's effective and entertaining with access to virtual labs and practice tests. Visit go.itpro.tv/floss for an additional 30% off for the lifetime of your active subscription. Use code FLOSS30 at checkout. It's time for Floss Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randal Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com, bringing you each week the movers, the shakers, the big projects, little projects, projects you may be using every day and not aware of it, projects you might want to look at right after this show. Today's probably one of those. Joining me once again is my lovely and talented co-host, Aaron Newcomb. Aaron, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks, Randal.
Hey, and it looks like you're speaking to us from your wife's makerspace, right?
Yeah. My makerspace is on the side you can't see. Although I've got a bunch of stuff back there on the floor from my retro computer hobby that I have. In fact, take a look at this. This is really cool. Okay. I was just putting this together, or actually restoring this. This is an Atari 8-bit computer, right? This is from an Atari 800.
Wow.
The camera probably won't focus very well, but look at this board. No, if you're a PCB aficionado, especially of boards of this vintage, I mean, this is just a beautiful board with all of the vertical traces on that side and then all of the horizontal traces on the other side. I mean, it's just really wonderful. I've been having a lot of fun with restoring these old 8-bit computers, and so that's a lot of that stuff you see on the ground behind me is just stuff waiting to get in front of a soldering iron.
I spent many hours playing with an Atari 800. I mean, as a user, not obviously as a hacker on that. But oh my God, I can't remember all the games I used to play all the time. Oh yeah. I think I even own a copy of E.T., which is the one they really destroyed.
Oh yeah, literally in the.
They put it in a
garbage.
dump or something.
They threw it in a they threw it in a landfill in the middle of the desert because they had too much stock left and they had to free up the warehouse space. It's pretty funny.
I am once again in my we call it the Tijuana kitchen set because there's a kitchen right behind me. There's a living room over here that you can't see. My bedroom's over there. I'm here a couple weeks a month, so I'm once again back here. My throat is only slightly better than it was last week, but boy, I tell you, I went back and listened to last week's show, and I went, oh my God, that throat was bad. And I was at DragonCon all weekend, and it never got any better, which was really sucked because I was on 4 panels. So hopefully it's going to get better. Hopefully it has its moments. It comes and goes. So we'll see how today's show goes. Today, interesting show. A lot about Python, which I don't know much about. It's funny because I introduced last week's show as Perl. I didn't know anything about. Ha ha ha. But Python, I really don't know a lot about, except having met Guido a few times and been on panels with him. We've got William Woodruff and Nicole Harris coming to talk to us about the security that they're implementing and increasing for PyPI. Now, all I know about PyPI is that it's the equivalent of the CBAN for Perl, in that it's the repository for all the Python packages that you might want to install. And it looks like things have been changing on it. And so they're going to talk to us about that. And glad we have experts on that to talk to us about that. What do you know about PyPI so far, Aaron?
I use PyPI quite a bit. I mean, I do code in Python pretty much anytime I'm doing anything that's not on a microcontroller. No, I like it. You know, it's got its quirk. It's better than Java. Let's put it that way. But no, so I do use PyPI quite a bit. I believe it stands for Python Package Index, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so.
And
we
we actually had an earlier episode all about PyPI. It was here, I've got it up here. If people want to take a look, it's Floss Weekly episode 482, where we talked to Dustin Ingram and Ernest Durbin III. So a little over a year ago, I thought, boy, this sounds familiar. We talked about PyPI before, but I think this is more about PyPI security, right?
I wasn't on that episode, right? No wonder I don't remember.
I don't know. Probably not. Let's see who was. Yes, you were. You were. There's your smiling face. I can see it on the
And
stage.
how do I not remember the PyPI? That's really weird. It's funny because I've been doing this show for 13 years, and I've done so many things, I've forgotten kind of what we've had on here. But I guess
I'm the same way. But that was more general, right? I mean, that was more generally about PyPI, not necessarily about these updates, which I think are mostly around security. So that's where it gets interesting, right? Is when you think about the vulnerability of some of these packages. That's something that always worries me. Is if I don't know, that's why open source is important, right? Because you can go in and look at the source code. But if you don't know where these are coming from, or if you're downloading something, you are putting quite a bit of trust in the system to protect you. And so I'm anxious to hear what kind of security improvements they've made to PyPI over the years, and I think just recently with a big one. So we'll have to see.
Well, it looks like they've implemented two-factor authentication, which is the new rage for everything. So we'll have to, again, talk to them about that. But before we do that, we do have an important message, because this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by CashFly. Give your users the seamless online experience they want. Power your site or app with CashFly CDN and be 30% faster than the competition. No matter what industry your business is in, if your website is directly tied to company revenue, give your customers the fast downloads they need with CashFly. CashFly CDN delivers rich media content up to 10 times faster than traditional delivery methods and up to 30% faster than other major CDNs. Backed by a 100% SLA, CashFly guarantees the best user experience for all your customers, no matter where they are or what device they're on. Join the thousands of others who trust CashFly's reliable network, including LG, Microsoft, Adobe, and Ars Technica. And I should also say the Twit network is also supported by CashFly. Say goodbye to logging in multiple times a week, or worse, even daily, trying to track your CDN usage. No billing spikes. Get a custom plan tailored to your CDN needs based on yearly usage trends. On average, customers who switch to CashFly save more than 20%. Just imagine what you could get with that 20% in your time. And just for Twit listeners, CashFly is giving away a complimentary detailed analysis of your current CDN bill and usage trends. See if you're overpaying 20% or more for CDN. Learn more at twit.cashfly.com. That's twit.cashfly.com. And we thank CashFly for their support of Floss Weekly and other shows on the Twit Network. Let's go ahead and bring on our guest. William, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
And where are you speaking to us from?
I'm actually calling in from the Trilobit's main office here in New York City in the financial district.
New York City. Yeah, I've been there many times. I used to go there 1 week a month for like about 6 years or so. So it was pretty cool. So they're the ones that taught me that, okay, you don't go on this subway at night. That's a bad subway. That sort of thing, right? You don't walk down these streets at night, these particular streets. So it's kind of fun. And let's also bring on Nicole Harris. Nicole, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And where are you speaking to us from?
I'm actually based in the city of Perth in Scotland. Despite my Australian accent, I live in the UK.
Oh, okay. Okay, I was going to say, but there's also a Perth in Australia, but that you're not that one.
Yeah. The Perth in Australia is named after the original Perth that's in Scotland.
Right, like New York is named after York, so it's kind of kind of odd that way. So let's start with William. Give us the 30,000 foot view. What's changed in the PyPI security that makes this worthy of a show?
Sure. Yeah. So the three major changes that we worked on in the last 5 or 6 months have been the addition of multi-factor authentication, specifically in the forms of TOTP and WebAuthn. WebAuthn is sort of like a new hotness in multi-factor schemes. We've also added API key support for publishing packages and publishing new releases. And then finally, we've added something called an audit log to make it easier for users to actually inspect recent security salient changes to their packages and account.
Well, I just heard a lot of jargon words. So can we break this down a little bit? You've got three things you added. Let's go in detail on each one of the three.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll start with the multi-factor authentication. So
yes.
Most users are probably familiar with it in the form of a TOTP application on their smartphone, where they are prompted for a six-digit code that they enter after entering their password to confirm to the site that they actually are who they say they are. We've added a similar scheme to PyPI via TOTP, but in addition to that scheme, there's also a protocol called WebAuthn, which allows users to use a security key, which is actually a physical token that they possess, which instead of entering a code, they'll simply press the button on the key and perform the same sort of security attestation.
So let me illuminate here. So I have an app called Authy on my phone that will give me a code to be able to log into some places that I have to get in and use two-factor authentication. I also have something that I think is called a YubiKey. It's something I plug into my laptop to be able to access some of the things that ZipRecruiter has for me. So these are the two kinds of things you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. Authy is an example of a TOTP application, and most YubiKeys support the WebAuthn standard.
Okay, and then what was the second thing that you said you changed?
The second thing would be API tokens, or rather, sorry, API keys. We've actually had some language issues with users getting confused by token, but we've added support for API keys for package uploads and releases and other things that previously you would have to use your username and password combination for and save to a plain text file on disk.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and the third thing was?
The third thing would be the audit log. And the idea behind the audit log was to sort of wrap up the changes that we made in the form of two multi-factor authentication and API keys. And actually expose those as permanent events on a user's account or a project history page, so that users could actually go back in time and see, oh, I don't remember making that change, or oh, I don't remember signing in from this IP at that time.
Yeah. And what's been your role with respect to these three things?
I've been the primary engineer on most of the security work. I did the majority of the work on the WebAuthn and TOTP implementations, at least on the back end side of things. Nicole was completely responsible for actually making it usable. And then on audit logs, similarly, I did the back end work for that.
Okay, and Nicole, your role has been to make it pretty or something? I'm trying to refer to what he was telling me that you did.
Yeah, so I lead the user experience and user interface, and also the HTML and CSS of PyPI. So my role in all this is making sure that the security features that we've added have actually been exposed to users in a way that's useful and that they can understand. I mean, for example, you just said, there's a whole lot of jargon there. And for a lot of people, some of that jargon can be confusing. So part of the challenge for me was to make sure that the changes that we're introducing were easy to use and easy to understand. I'm also involved with the Python packaging working group, which is the body that sits under the Python Software Foundation, who raised the money to actually be able to do this work as well. So I have a role in that side as well.
Jonathan Bennett in the chat room, who's actually a frequent co-host of this show, in fact, probably more frequent than almost anybody else, says that TOTP stands for time-based one-time password. Is that fair? Is that the right spelling?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So,
good. Because you kept saying TOTP, and I kept going, what the heck's that? But Jonathan's in the chat room, so it's pretty good. Also, Jonathan wants to know, is Audit Lock an immutable user history, or is it Audit Log? What were you saying there?
Yeah, I apologize. Audit Log, LOG.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
it is
so
currently
it's a way. Okay, it's immutable, but it's a way of tracking who did what to when, and have there been, obviously this work is propelled by something. What's the biggest motivation for making the changes that you guys are obviously putting energy into?
Yeah, I can answer some of that.
Sure.
I think one of the primary motivations behind this work has been, so recently package indices have been in at least the tech news quite frequently for like these really embarrassing vulnerabilities where a user will take over a package or will typo squat a package or will employ some other sort of very well-known weakness in indexing or package uploading to essentially compromise a vast majority of open source applications. Or a wide span of open source applications. And so I think some of the motivation behind at least the funding for this work from the OTF was to take PyPI, which is probably, if not the largest, one of the largest package indices out there, and sort of propel it to a state, of being a paradigm for the package index ecosystem.
Just in terms of scale, and I don't know which one of you could answer this, but or if you even have this information, but how many users do you think there are that use PyPI? Like, how busy is it? Because I think that'll give us an indication of, the scope of the problem, right?
I wish I had the data. Well, when you think about the users of PyPI, there's actually sort of, you break it down into two groups. So there's the people who are actually logging in via pypi.org, who are using their browser, and then there's the people who are installing packages directly from their command line. So in terms of the users who are logging in, I think I was on Analytics last night, and I think it was about 500,000 per week who are on pypi.org. But in terms of the people who are actually installing, I don't have that figure, but I know certainly that it's a very substantial number in the billions of requests per month, I think, who are downloading packages.
Wow. It's so crazy to think of the scale. Of course, Python is one of the most popular languages out there. I think in most of the surveys, it's the most popular language now, surpassing Java. But I'm sure the Java fanboys will come back and dispute that. But most of the information I've seen says Python's now the most popular language. So that raises the stakes quite a bit as the language grows, I assume. William, how difficult was it to implement some of these changes, just given the scale of the system itself?
Yeah, I think there was a certain amount of difficulty given the scale. Fortunately, the code base that actually powers pypi.org, which is named Warehouse, is actually, I say this not just as flattery to the Warehouse team, but it actually has a very nicely laid out code base. It actually follows the idioms of the pyramid, the framework it uses, pretty cleanly, and has complete branch coverage in terms of unit tests and consistent migrations for databases and everything like that. So in terms of actually being confident in development and deployment, it was not too difficult to. I wasn't overly concerned with development locally not being actually able to reproduce local development in the actual deployment environment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'm sure you did testing for something like this, right? I mean, how long were you testing?
Yeah, testing was sort of broken up into local testing on my part, then sort of like pseudo acceptance testing via Nicole and you mentioned them, Ernest and Dustin and Donald on the PSF side, as well as Sumina on the contract side. So they performed sort of acceptance testing, and then finally we rolled out 2 of the 3 features as beta features before actually marking them as like ready to use by the broader PyPI community.
Yeah. Any major learnings? I'm just kind of curious from something this size and making sure you have to make sure it works pretty much flawlessly, or else people are going to get upset pretty quickly. So, any major learnings from that testing? Yeah.
One major thing that I learned was that PyPI's database has sort of grown organically over the years because constraints have been added and removed as package naming conventions have been solidified and formalized. And so one thing that actually we ran into when we were designing API keys was that the specification language we came up with for saying, oh, this token should only be allowed to upload to these packages would fail when a package's normalized name was actually committed as both its normalized value in the database and as its non-normalized name, which can happen in some cases. So we ran into some occasional like actual user reported or event tracking system caught errors because of things like that.
It's always interesting to hear what people learn in the process of developing, either new features or implementing new types of features into a system like this. Nicole, I wanted to come back to you and just ask, how has this impacted end users, or how does it impact end users in a practical way, since you're the UX expert here?
Yeah, so I mean, it's just that end users essentially have more features that they can enable on their account. So, well, in the case of two-factor authentication, we're trying to encourage everybody to set that up. So when they log into their PyPI account, which I should be clear, not everybody who's a Python programmer will have a PyPI account. It's generally only people who are managing projects, who are project maintainers. But when they log in, they'll be able to set up either method of two-factor authentication. We recommend both. And they'll also be able to obviously have the control of the API tokens when uploading as well. So those two things are really just about making life better for our package maintainers. And then from a UI perspective, it's just a matter of having the information available to them. In the case of a security breach, that's also very useful for us as obviously we're exposing the security logs, but part of the reason that we've done that is so that as maintainers of PyPI, if there is a breach, that we can actually do investigations on our side as well. So it's not just about exposing that to the users, it's actually making our life easier as well.
Right. So how would this have been done before? It sounds like it's optional for one thing, right? So if you're really concerned about it as a maintainer, you might want to turn it on, but it is optional, correct? And then the question is, how do you contrast when there is a breach or a problem, how you would troubleshoot that before with, obviously now it sounds like it's a lot easier with the audit logs, et cetera, but.
So the audit logs will be there regardless. You don't have to turn those on as a user. So you'll still get audit events whether or not you've turned on two-factor authentication or whether or not you've enabled API tokens. It's just that you won't get as much information. So for example, in your account audit log, it might say that you've logged in at a certain time from a certain IP address, but it would say two-factor method none because you haven't used a two-factor method. Whereas if you're using, say, a YubiKey, it would say two-factor method WebAuthn. So the audit log information is going to be there regardless of whether or not the users do anything. But obviously, as they do add more security features to their account, they'll be able to then see those things exposed in the audit log as well. One thing that's really useful to mention as well is that many of the projects on PyPI are managed by a team of people rather than just one person. So for us to be able to expose when somebody else on your project has set up an API token to be able to upload is also a very useful feature for our users. So you can say, okay, the person that I'm collaborating with, they've done something on their side, which is being exposed to me. So that's right. Quite a powerful feature as well.
Right. And by the way, I just to take a bit of a detour here, I've always called it PyPI, but throughout this interview so far, I've heard both of you, and I remember this from the last interview too, calling it PyPI, not PyPI. So how much trouble are we going to get in during this? How many nasty comments are we going to get from people that are going to be like, it's not PyPI? I love calling it PyPI. I think it's cute.
It is, I mean, it is PyPI. The reason that it's PyPI is because there's another project called PyPI, which is an alternative implementation of Python. So we try to be quite specific about saying PyPI to avoid that kind of confusion between the two projects, because they're both very visible within the Python community.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll try. I don't know if I'll be able to break bad habits, but I'll try. William, going back to you, I'm just curious. What was there any? I mean, beyond people asking for this feature. I mean, were there known problems or big problems? You mentioned that there was kind of a trend in this direction, generally in the industry. But have there been problems in the past with PyPI? And people inserting either some bad code or uploading something that they shouldn't?
Yeah, with regards to PyPI specifically, I believe PyPI has been relatively lucky to have not had as many issues. So, as some background context, PyPI did already have a typo squatting protection built into it by the time we started this contract, and so. There already are protections in place for attempting to create a project whose name is too similar to a already existing project, and so that alone actually surprisingly puts PyPI ahead of just about every other open source package index out there. However, in terms of common attacks like credential stuffing, PyPI was vulnerable to those. Still is to a certain extent, provided users do not enable two-factor authentication, insofar as every login system is vulnerable to them. And we have seen in the past with package managers like Ruby Gems and MTM and NPM for Node.js actually be successfully attacked via credential stuffing or via typo squatting.
Yeah. And how much demand was there from the user base for implementing these features? I mean, was this like one of the top requested items for people that they were looking for?
Yeah, I believe so. Nicole may be able to answer this one better than me because she had some visibility into the community before the actual OTF funded work. But I do remember both API keys and two-factor authentication were happily received on GitHub at least. And we did have quite a bit of very eager discussion on Python's forums and mailing lists with regard to when it would be arriving and when people would begin to when people would be allowed to actually use it.
It's also a matter of.
Yeah, go ahead, Nicole. I was going to let you jump in.
It's also a matter of PyPI is a very visible property for the Python Software Foundation, and there's a certain community responsibility, I think, in making sure that, if you are providing a service like PyPI, that it is following best practices and that we're doing the best that we can. So I think the drive from the side of the Packaging Working Group and from the PSF is very much about wanting to be best in class and wanting to provide the best for the Python community, which I think is an admirable thing.
Yeah, for sure. The flip side of that, though, could be that people it's more cumbersome. Anytime you implement a security feature like this, most of the time people will be fine with it and they'll go along with it because they understand the benefits that they're getting. Has there been any negative reactions so far from implementing this? And also, are you since it's optional, I would guess not, but I'll let you answer that one. And then second question would be. Well, answer the first one first, and then I'll come back to the second question. Any negative feedback?
I don't think so. William, can you think of anything that's been negative? I think most people have been really receptive to what we've done. And because it's not intrusive, as you say, it's optional.
Yeah, I think overwhelmingly the response has been positive. We've had the usual sort of bike shedding over small implementation details, but overall I think the community has been really happy to receive. First of all, TOTP, because TOTP is essentially free. All you need is some kind of application. Yeah. And then for people who do have access to security keys, WebAuthn was also quite happily received.
Yeah, I would imagine so. And it sounds like you did your testing, so it wasn't like there was weird. Doesn't sound like anyway. There's a lot of weird bugs where someone signed up for it and then couldn't log in or something like that. Nicole, one more question for you, and then I'm gonna let Randal jump back in. Any concern about people either dropping off the platform or releasing less frequently, I guess, because of the additional steps they have to take to log in and so forth?
I don't think so, because as I said, it's completely optional for people to enable two-factor authentication or to use API tokens. So, I mean, if anything, particularly with the API tokens, I would expect that it might increase how often people might be able to release, because they'll be able to, instead of having to enter their username and password, they can use a token, which is much safer and more convenient. So it's not something that I've actually measured, but we could certainly set up in Google Analytics to have a look at the impact.
Okay, I can't let Aaron take all the show up, but I do have an important message before I ask my next question, which is, this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by IT Pro TV. Enjoy learning with IT Pro TV's edutainers who blend education and entertainment to make learning IT engaging and fun in an interactive talk show format. IT Pro TV has over 4,000 hours of IT training available, and they are the official video training partner for CompTIA. They have 12 CompTIA on-demand courses, CompTIA A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus certificates. Do you want to create your own training videos? IT Pro TV can help you create custom training to meet your organization's needs. From planning to post-production, choose the services you want and execute on your video strategy easily. Bring your own host or use one of IT Pro TV's. Pick from multiple HD studios that include HD robotic cameras, DMX dimmable LED lighting, overhead talkback monitor, direct live streaming system, and so much more. Whether you're new to the IT field or seasoned pro, IT Pro TV's online IT training courses can change your life. Become part of IT Pro TV's family with either a standard membership, video only, or a premium membership, video plus labs and practice tests. Don't wait. Visit go.itpro.tv/floss and use the code FLOSS30 and you'll receive 30% off. That's go.itpro.tv/floss and use the code FLOSS30 for an additional 30% off the lifetime of your active subscription. IT Pro TV, build or expand your IT career and enjoy the journey. We are happy for IT Pro TV's support of Floss Weekly. And now let me go ahead and figure out what the question was I was going to ask. There we go. So in the CPAN, a team or a person can own like a particular namespace. Is that also possible in PyPI?
PyPI doesn't have a notion of namespaces in the way CPAN does. I have published packages to CPAN before, so I'm a little bit familiar. Okay. But what PyPI does have is just universally unique package names, and then also non-unique classifier IDs that you can actually bin your package into, so that users can discover it as like similar to other web frameworks or what have you.
Okay, and we actually had questions in the chat room trying to figure out who actually asked this. Is there any kind of scanning done for malicious code as people are uploading to PyPI?
At the moment, there is none. That is actually the subject of a currently open RFI by the Python Software Foundation, I believe. Nicole can correct me on that if I'm wrong. But that would be some sort of follow-on work from the work that we're currently doing.
Okay, because obviously, you're talking about security and increasing security. You've also got to deal with the security of the people who are downloading code as well to be able to fix that. We had an incident about 7 or 8 years ago, I think it was, probably further now. I guess I tend to think of like Perl 5.6 is relatively recent, so I've been around Perl way too long. But we had an incident where someone uploaded some code that would phone home when it was installed, and his claim was that he wanted to make sure that you weren't installing like an old version, that it would phone home. But the way it did that was, hopefully you're familiar with the idea of a Perl eval. So it actually would hit a website, eval the code that came back, and in there would be some version number check. And he couldn't figure out why that would be a bad thing. So, have you had anything similar to that in PyPI?
So to my knowledge, I think that there have been packages in the past that have done similar things where you just essentially fetch down and then eval arbitrary code.
Ouch.
I don't know what the visibility of those currently is in terms of active scanning. I believe there has been some, as of like 2 or 3 years ago, there was some sort of community effort on a few different package indices to sort of automatically detect and statically analyze packages for those kind of plausibly deniable mistakes. But nothing really formal yet.
Well, it's funny because that, to my recollection, I've been on the CPAN mailing list for a while, but I haven't been following it closely in the last couple of years. But to my recollection, that's the only person who ever got delisted from the CPAN. It was like all of his stuff was immediately erased, and it was like, no, you don't get to do this. This is not even permitted. Although I do believe Mark Jason Dominus uploaded a package that would do an rm-rf on slash if you actually installed it. So, and just to prove the point, actually, I think it did it by putting a die in front of that. So it was like, okay, if you had actually finished installing this, you would have no root file system. And that's always going to be a problem, right? When we have a shared repository, we have to somehow have some level of trust for how we do this. I know the CPAN also has things like ratings. Are there ratings for PyPI where you can say this is a 5-star or a 1-star piece of software?
Yeah, so I can take that question.
Sure,
there
thanks.
used to be ratings on PyPI on the old version of PyPI. So you mentioned earlier that you had Ernest and Dustin come on the show. I guess that they were talking about the transition from our old code base to our new code base. So on the old code base, at some point there was a rating system, but what we found from a community management perspective is that it wasn't particularly efficient or fair, because you might have someone rating a package, but then there was no way for the package author to be able to respond. It was very arbitrary. The policy on PyPI was very much, we don't recommend anything, and if you want to go and get an opinion on something, then there are other sites out there within the Python community that can provide that information. Right.
So what's on the roadmap? What's coming next for PyPI security? What do we have coming up?
So maybe first, other than security, maybe we should first talk about what else is covered by the OTF grant. So the security work that we've been doing on PyPI has been funded by the Open Technology Fund. So the Python Packaging Working Group, which is, as I mentioned, a subgroup of the Python Software Foundation, made an application, a grant application to that group. And they funded us not just for security, they also funded us to make PyPI more accessible. So for people who are using screen readers or basically PyPI.org, making it better for people who are using assistive technology, and also to localize PyPI.org as well, because we've got a massive international community. Python community is huge all over the world. So those are the two sort of major things that are coming very, very soon, because they've actually been funded as part. There were sort of three parts to the funding: security, accessibility, and localization. In terms of security, I think maybe William is better positioned to talk in more detail in terms of some of the things that might be coming, or that we're hoping that will come next.
Yeah, I can talk a bit about that. In terms of just the current scope of work, we are wrapping up some small functionality improvements to WebAuthn, as well as improvements to the actual underlying implementation that we're using for API keys, which is Macaroons. And so one thing we're adding there is the ability to specify more complex acceptance criteria for an API token. So, for example, you could say that an API token is only valid for 2 hours after being crafted, or is only valid for publishing releases of certain files of certain versions, or is only valid for other much more complex conditions. The idea being there to create like extremely constrained tokens to avoid the hazards of token breach.
You used a word that I was about to ask about. What is a macaroon?
Yes, macaroons are a sort of, I guess they're sort of a standard at this point. They're a standard for authenticated authorization tokens. So they provide a serialization format as well as what's called a caveat language, which essentially just is a formal specification of the permissions associated with the crafted token, cryptographically signed, and then validated on the server side. And one of the major advantages of macaroons over like sort of the traditional API key implementation, which is just to generate a random stream of bytes and then pair it on the database side with a set of permissions, is that the actual permissions are baked into the signature for the key. So you can't have someone like compromise your database and update permissions. And similarly, macaroons allow for what's called authority attenuation, which is where a third-party service can actually read the caveats and determine whether or not it wants to grant subsequent permissions based on them for its own purposes.
So it's like a token string that has enough structure to it that people can determine the authorizations and authentications that have been granted to it?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Wow, cool. Got it in one. That's not bad. I'm going to ask a weird question, and you guys are free to not answer it, but what impact has Guido leaving had on the project?
In my knowledge, none. Because, I mean, on Python, that's another story, but on Python packaging, he's no impact as far as I'm aware, because that's basically we have, in the Python world, we have a group called the Python Packaging Authority, which is a group of open source developers who work specifically on the subject of packaging. So it's not just PyPI, but also the tools that interact with PyPI and indeed some other projects that exist out there in the community. And so Guido wasn't part of that group. So that group has continued on without his participation.
And okay, so you skipped the larger question, which was what impact has it had on the Python community? I
mean, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, fair answer. That's I was just curious because it's like in some senses Larry has left the Perl project. He's gone on to just be the BFDL for whatever emeritus. So what's really happening now is that the Pumpkins are taking over for all the releases and stuff. So what is token scoping? What is that about?
Yeah, so that goes back to the permission system that I was talking about.
Okay, so that's
every token or key rather has a scope associated with it, which would be either like a user scope for all actions permitted for a particular user, or a set of packages for which uploads are permitted, or a timestamp range, or a version range, or something like that.
Okay, and so is this a labor of love for the two of you, or are you funded somehow?
Yeah, so I can take that one. So in terms of my history with PyPI, it's a bit of both. So I started off as an open source contributor on PyPI many years ago, I think 2015, so four years ago, almost 5 years ago. As I mentioned, we were moving to this new code base called Warehouse. And then as the Python Packaging Working Group has been able to raise funds, we've been able to fund so far 2 projects through grants, and this particular work has been funded, as I said, by the Open Technology Fund, the OTF. So in my case at the moment, I'm getting paid to work on open source, which is quite nice. And William is a contractor that's been brought in specifically for this project. Previously, when you had Ernest and Dustin on the show, that's when we had also received a grant. We received a grant from the Mozilla Open Source Software Fund, and they also have funded PyPI development in the past. So we're very fortunate in that, things keep ticking over as a normal open source project would, but because we've been very active in making applications for grants, we are able to occasionally fund some of the larger features that we deploy to PyPI.
Yeah.
Cool.
And in my case, it is purely a contract in this case. I am active in other open source work as a personal hobby, but Trailobits was brought in to do specifically the most of the security work on this OTF-funded contract.
Nice. Well, we're almost out of time, so one question for both of you at least, and I know the answer to the usual other two questions. I think maybe I don't. Maybe I don't actually know. So what haven't we asked yet that you want to make sure our audience is aware of before we have to let you go? I know it's a difficult question because it's a set subtraction problem where it's like everything you wanted to talk about minus everything we talked about, and so it's a little tricky, but it's the most difficult question.
I think on my side, one thing that I would like to cover is the way I think I'm quite uniquely positioned within the open source world because it's not that common that you would have someone with a design background contributing to a project like this in an open source capacity. So what I would maybe like to cover is very briefly is just talking about the way that we've kind of validated the design decisions that have happened on PyPI as well. So in terms of development, the development of PyPI follows a fairly normal open source flow, but in terms of the design, it's really challenging because you're designing in the open. So one thing that I've done is and William mentioned this earlier, is run user tests to make sure that the features that we're deploying are actually usable and useful for the different members of the community. And I am looking actually at the moment for volunteers for more user tests. So if there's anybody out there within your listener base who is using PyPI and in particular is using continuous integration to upload to PyPI, I'd be very interested in talking to them about their workflow, because understanding that will allow me to actually improve some of the interfaces that we've built. So that would be the one thing that I would like to call out.
Cool. And William, anything for you?
Yes, slightly on a similar note. One thing that I think is sort of underrated when doing security engineering is concerns about security fatigue when building out new security features. And I think one thing that we sort of glossed over, but that we actually, I think I'm actually really proud of in the work that we've done on Warehouse is making sure that security improvements to the platform don't actually, or to the smallest extent possible, frustrate users and actually scare them away from materially improving the security posture of their accounts and of their projects. And good user interface design is a huge part of that. And similarly, good defaults are a huge part of that. So actually putting users in the right initial state to make good security decisions, like nagging them and giving them, even if it's just as simple as like a default option inside of an HTML combo box or whatever, can make a huge difference in terms of safe defaults or safe security decisions.
Indeed. In fact, Jonathan Bennett, again, like I said, a frequent co-host on the show, just said in the chat room, good UX UI developer is a godsend, so important. Jonathan also had another question just a little earlier. Let me see if I can scroll back to it here. So Node.js had an issue where a new maintainer came on for a project, then pushed malicious code into the project. Any solution for this sort of thing? I think he says Event Stream was the project.
Yeah, I recall that. Currently, and this is like one of the standard attack vectors for package indices. And there currently really is no direct remediation to that. Fortunately, with the new event log, that's actually something that we'll be able to track and see, you can write like a query that says, give me all events where a user was added to a project and then immediately pushed a new version. And this IP is nothing like the other ones that we've seen for this project before.
Yeah,
so that's
that would definitely
statically scan for.
That would definitely. Hydrian also in the chat room says, are there any plans to deprecate the older, weaker authentication techniques?
Yes, that is on the roadmap to get rid of username, password authentication for uploads eventually.
Great, cool. Okay, 2 more questions, then I got to let you guys go because we're running out of time here. We're at the bottom of the hour again already. That hour goes by so fast. It's so amazing how quickly it is. I bet I know the answer for this question from both of you. Your favorite programming language?
You want to go, Nicole?
Yeah, my favorite programming language is CSS.
Oh, that's not okay. Sure, all right. That's not really a programming language, but okay. We'll take it.
We can have that discussion if you like.
It's not Turing complete. It's not Turing complete. It's not Turing
okay,
complete.
Well, so, it's my favorite coding language.
Yes, okay. That's fine. That's fine. As long as you understand it's not Turing complete. So it's not a programming language.
And one thing I would like to say is that writing scalable complex CSS is actually something that I think is highly undervalued.
Yes, no, I totally agree with that. CSS is amazing, but it's okay. And William, same question. Same question, William.
My answer is actually a little bit controversial, I guess, for the Python community. I'm not actually a big Python programmer personally. My favorite programming language is Ruby. So
that's great. That's great.
Yeah,
I love it. That's great. Ruby is the I like to call it the stepchild of both Perl and Smalltalk. So it's kind of a little bit of both. So it's kind of nice that you just said Ruby. That's fine. And text editor. Now, William first.
Yeah, I switch between Vim and Sublime Text for the most part.
All right. And Nicole, same question.
I use Atom.
Sorry, what?
Nice.
Atom.
Adam. Oh, Adam. Okay, sorry, your accent was a little off for me.
Sorry.
And it's funny because I've been to Australia a few times. So I should have this accent down by now, but it was tough the first time I was there, so I guess it's still tough. Hey guys, William and Nicole, welcome to the show. We already did that at the beginning of the show. Thanks for being on the show, talking to us about what you're doing in terms of improving PyPI security and all your future needs. And if you want to come back on in a couple of years and talk about the new things you've done, that's also welcome. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
That's great. That's great. That was William Woodruff and Nicole Harris talking to us about PyPI security. See, I'm saying it right now. I'm saying it right. Now that I know it's correct. I was saying it wrong like for the last 18 introductions to this show. Anyway, Aaron, what do you think?
I'm really glad they made these changes, right? I mean, like I said at the top, I mean, I'm always concerned, not necessarily with Python, but other things that I download, right? How do I know that there isn't some malicious code in there? And especially since, I download a lot of stuff
right.
from questionable sources, let's say, sometimes, assuming that it's safe and it's okay. I'm always worried about, so as an end user, this makes me feel a lot safer, right? Just knowing that the option is out there. In fact, it might be interesting to have on certain projects have like some sort of reward system or a star or an indication, like, hey, this package, everybody uses two-factor authentication, or this has advanced security turned on, or something like that. I think it would be, kind of reassuring to me as an end user to see that. But just knowing that it exists now, I think is really helpful. And it's interesting. We talked a little bit about stats before, and as you were questioning, I was going through the PyPI website. I'm forcing myself to do it. And they do have stats that get refreshed, which is always kind of fun to see, because as you refresh the page, the stats refresh. And there's almost 200,000 projects now on PyPI, almost 1.5 million releases, over 2 million files, and 366,925 users. Let's hit refresh. Nope, 366,931 users now. On PyPI. So it's really interesting to see those the stats and just how enormous the project is and how important this type of update is to the package. The other thing I'll say, and then I'll give it back to you, I always try to put this in when I can, is that if you're a new developer, or if you're in high school or college and you're thinking about becoming a programmer, one of the cool things about the PyPI website is you can go there and see trending projects and new releases. And if you're looking for ways to get involved, this is a great way. Reach out to the maintainers of these packages, or fix bugs or whatever. There's under the trending project, there's Betamax Serializers. I thought Betamax was dead. I don't know what this is. It's probably something else. It's probably not what I'm thinking of, but it kind of piques your interest. It's like, oh, I wonder what that is. I want to figure out why do they call it Betamax? What is that project? Maybe it's something I want to get involved with. And so that's my little spiel. Go visit the website, and it's pypi.org. And take a look at some of these projects. I'm sure you'll find something interesting to work on. And it'll also help you decide whether that's something you actually want to do for an extended period of time as your day job.
And this ability to have like a shared repository where you could pull off-the-shelf solutions to almost anything you want. I mean, it's funny because the span of what's in the CPAN and what's in PyPI and Ruby gems and things like that mean that you're not starting from scratch to get your problem solved. And it's so amazing that this is part of the open source mindset that you would share with you, and that way you could stand on the shoulder of giants, to be able to get your things done. I'd say probably a third of what ZipRecruiter is using, for example, is stuff that's pulled down from the CPAN. And this is amazing. It means that they don't have to hire the people to write that stuff. It's all already written for them. And PyPI, I'm sure, is the same way, is that there's so many things already done. I forgot to ask them what the website's written in, but I bet it's like Django or something like that, because that's all Python. But anyway, so it's really amazing to see how the open source community provides this sort of ability to essentially make a potluck where you bring the pizza and you get to take the salad. You don't have to have the whole thing with you already. And it's an amazing concept to be able to do this in the open source community. And all open source communities, not just Perl and Python and Ruby, but pretty much across the board, there's pretty much open source everything's now. And but 20 years ago, this would have been unthinkable, pretty much. And I'm glad that PyPI is around. I'm glad that CPAN is around. I'm glad for all these things because it makes my work easier. I've contributed a few things to the CPAN, but I've taken a lot from the CPAN. So it's just been really, really useful to me.
Yeah, huge points for developer efficiency. Can you imagine, before these types of repositories existed, it'd be a lot of duplication of work going on as one and people are solving things in different ways. I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to think about those times before these types of repositories existed, because it just seems like a nightmare.
Well, I remember back in the early days, there was this thing called DECUS, which was the DEC user group repository. But you'd have to physically go to the meetings, the meetups, and copy tapes or copy cassettes or whatever to be able to take that stuff from there. And now, of course, it's like, okay, CPAN install, blah, 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 or whatever the PyPI command is, blah, 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 and it's done. NPM install, blah, blah, blah. It's so much easier, so much nicer. Thank goodness for the internet, and thank goodness for all of that. Anything else before we go?
No, that's enough reminiscing and waxing elegantly or inelegantly, as the case may be.
Yeah. So added between last week and this week is Cockroach Db. Is that alarm you're hearing from here? Let's see. It's probably, I tell you, in Tijuana there's a lot of sirens going by. Cockroach DB is a distributed SQL database built on a transactional and strongly consistent key value store. That should be kind of fun. Also, it's going to be kind of fun because they have an interesting license. So I will shut up about that because last time I talked about that, the person canceled the show. So I'm not going to say anything about that this time. And then following that is OggCamp. We're going to have Simon and Dan talk about what's coming up at OggCamp in a month from there. The homepage for the show is twit.tv/floss. You can go there. If you have any other suggestions, please tell the project leader or the community coordinator to email me, merlin@stonehenge.com. You know what? We forgot to mention blockchain in this show, so I'm just going to say blockchain now. And all of you that are playing the blockchain game, now is your time. Now is your time. Okay, I forgot to ask the guest that, but I don't imagine blockchain's anywhere involved in PyPI. We have a live stream at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays at live.twit.tv, and we took a number of questions from there. You can follow us at Floss Weekly on Twitter. You can follow me at Merlin, MERLYN on Twitter. I have nothing really to plug except that I will be in about 6 weeks, I think it is, at All Things Open in mid-October, I guess. So that's coming up. Again, if you want to register for that, it's a really cheap show to begin with. 5,000 attendees, 22 tracks, I think. It's an amazing conference. If you want to register for that, it's already pretty cheap, but if you go to their registration page and you enter Floss Weekly, all in lowercase, as one word, you will get in for the cheapest price possible. I believe it's still $99 for the entire show. So please do that. Aaron, anything you want to plug?
I don't have a whole lot of plugs. You can go out and buy my book if you want. It's still pretty relevant. It's been out there for a few years now, I guess. But Linux for Makers is available, online or in bookstores, and it is relevant because even last night I was at the Raspberry Pi meetup that we host, and someone was trying to figure out how to mount their USB drive from the command line. And I only occasionally use the desktop, but I always have to go to the desktop to mount a USB drive because in Raspberry Pi it doesn't do it automatically. If you're just in command line, the desktop manages that, and so I was like, well, go buy my book and you can learn how to do that. And you won't have to remember. You can just earmark that page and just go back to it when you need to know how to mount a file system. And so we had a little discussion about that, but it's amazing how much that comes up actually in practice. The other things I'll mention real quickly are, I don't have anything, coming up right away, but there are a couple of big conferences that come up in the fall around cloud every year. One is Microsoft Ignite. And the other one is AWS reInvent. I'll be at both of those shows for work. I work at AppDynamics. And nice. So I'll be around the AppDynamics booth. And so I'm just giving people a really forewarning well in advance that if they're at those shows, I know there's like 60,000 people, I think, expected at AWS reInvent this year. If you're at one of those shows and you want to stop and say hi or grab a coffee or a beer or something, be happy to do it. I'll be at both of those shows this fall. So look me up or, reach out on Twitter or something like that and let me know you're around and want to meet up, and I'll try to do that if I can.
Cool. And about reading your own book, I remember I've written 255 magazine articles over the years, and I've gotten permission from the publishers to put those all online. And so occasionally I'll go, I know there's a way to do this. And I'll Google, and up will come one of my own articles saying, this is how you do this. It's like...
Yep.
I've been around this industry too long. It's obvious. It's very obvious. Well, 40 years now of professional, so it's not bad. Anyway, Aaron, thanks once again for joining me and co-hosting the show. I'm looking forward to the next time we get to chat. I know it hasn't been a while. It's been a while, I think, since I've had you on the show. So good that you do that.
I think I hosted when you were out sick a couple of times. Yeah. I was on with Dan, but it has been a while since I've been on with you personally. So yeah, it is good to see you and talk to you over the World Wide Web. as it were.
Yes, fun. And I'll be on next week again in this very same location. Nobody has yet picked out the magnet that's moved, so that challenge is still going on. So, but we'll see you all again next week on Floss Weekly.